At 20 degrees below zero, the rules of combat completely change. Steel stops acting like a reliable tool and becomes a deadly liability. Moisture from a desperate breath freezes onto metal surfaces within seconds. Gun oil, meant to keep mechanisms running smoothly, turns into a thick, useless paste that resembles frozen glue. Deep in the Ardennes forest, during the brutal December of 1944, the American infantry was not just fighting the German war machine. They were fighting the weather itself, and they were losing terribly. Heavy snow had erased the supply roads, dense, freezing fog had grounded all Allied air support, and the plummeting temperatures were quietly disarming the men huddled in the foxholes. Down in a shallow, ice-caked trench, a frozen sentry stared into the impenetrable white mist. Slung tightly across his chest was the absolute pride of the American arsenal. The submachine gun he carried was a masterpiece of early 20th century engineering. Milled from solid blocks of high-quality steel, fitted with polished walnut furniture, and engineered with the precision of a Swiss watch, it was a gangster's icon and a soldier's dream. But precision is a luxury that unforgiving nature despises. When the dark shadows in the fog finally began to move, the sentry raised the heavy, beautiful weapon to his shoulder. He pulled the trigger, expecting a roar to sound the alarm. Instead of a deafening blast, there was only a pathetic, metallic click. The deadliest sound in a firefight is a click when you expect a bang. The tight, perfect tolerances of the machined parts had frozen solid in the sub-zero temperature. The weapon was completely dead. Panic set in instantly as white-clad enemy soldiers materialized like ghosts from the tree line. They were armed with weapons that were already spitting fire into the dark. The sentry dove to the bottom of the frozen trench, dropping the $200 piece of useless art into the snow. Desperate, his freezing, blistered fingers reached blindly for the only other weapon lying in the frozen dirt. It was a weapon the men absolutely despised. A piece of equipment that looked less like a firearm and more like a tool stolen from a cheap mechanic's garage. To call this backup weapon ugly was a profound understatement. It did not possess a beautiful wooden stock. It did not feature polished, blued steel. It was stamped out of cheap sheet metal by a division of General Motors, a factory that primarily manufactured car headlights. The two halves of the receiver were crudely welded together right down the middle, leaving a visible, ugly seam. It featured a wire stock that dug painfully into the shoulder and a crank handle on the side that looked like it belonged on a meat grinder. The troops had taken one look at its cylindrical body and immediately gave it a nickname meant as a harsh insult. They called it the grease gun. Generals hated the way it looked on the parade ground. Veterans of the early war flatly refused to trade their beautiful, heavy submachine guns for it. It cost a mere $15 to manufacture, making it a glaring symbol of frantic, desperate mass production. It felt incredibly cheap in the hands. It looked completely disposable. But looking disposable and being useless on a battlefield are two entirely different things. Huddled in the dirt, under a terrifying shower of splintering wood and freezing mud kicked up by enemy bullets, there was zero time to complain about aesthetics. The cold metal of the tubular receiver bit sharply through thin wool gloves. The clumsy, fixed iron sights were practically invisible in the pitch black of the forest. Pivoting over the lip of the foxhole, the stamped metal muzzle found the advancing shadows. The trigger was pulled with raw, unfeeling fingers. The cheap weapon did not click. It roared to life. The defining flaw of this despised gun, its loose, sloppy manufacturing tolerances, suddenly became its greatest tactical asset. While tightly fitted parts bound up with frost, ice, and grit, this crude tube of steel had room to breathe. The massive heavy bolt inside the cheap sheet metal housing slammed forward with immense force, literally crushing the ice and dirt out of its way. It did not care about the freezing mud. It did not care about the driving snow. It just worked. Chug, 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 chug. The sound echoing through the trees was bizarre. Compared to the terrifying, canvas-ripping screech of an enemy machine gun, this cheap weapon fired at a sluggish 450 rounds per minute. It was so agonizingly slow that a trained ear could almost count the individual bullets leaving the barrel. To the untrained eye of a staff officer, this slow rate of fire seemed like yet another fatal flaw in a garbage design. But in the terrifying chaos of close-quarters night combat, that slow, rhythmic thud was a mechanical blessing in disguise. Firing a massive .45 caliber slug out of a fast-firing weapon creates violently uncontrollable recoil. The barrel inevitably climbs toward the sky, wasting precious ammunition on the clouds and exposing the shooter. But the sluggish cyclic rate of this stamped metal tube meant the weapon did not jump erratically. It simply shook, with a heavy, predictable, and manageable rhythm. At that specific speed, every single massive bullet stayed exactly on target. It functioned like a pneumatic hammer driving heavy steel nails into solid concrete. The heavy slugs hit the advancing tree line with devastating kinetic energy, shattering the frozen bark and stopping the initial infantry assault dead in its tracks. For 20 horrifying minutes, the tree line lit up with blinding muzzle flashes. The dense fog turned into a glowing, chaotic soup of orange light and white smoke. The defensive line was bending dangerously under the immense weight of the surprise offensive, but the rhythmic, unstoppable hammering of the cheap submachine gun anchored that tiny section of the trench. Firing a continuous burst, reloading the awkward single-feed magazines with freezing, bleeding thumbs, the weapon never choked. The barrel began to smoke heavily, melting the snow around it, turning the freezing foxhole into a claustrophobic steam bath. A mechanized half-track suddenly pushed heavily through the mist, its mounted gunner desperately searching for the source of the heavy resistance. The vehicle's angled armor was far too thick for standard rifle fire to penetrate. But the slow, steady recoil of the crude submachine gun allowed for terrifying, pinpoint accuracy at close range. A sustained, horizontal sweep of armor-piercing tracer rounds aggressively hammered the open compartment of the half-track. The heavy slugs smashed into the gun shield, silencing the mounted weapon and forcing the panicked driver to throw the vehicle into a frantic reverse, crashing blindly back into the dark pines. When dawn finally broke, painting the Ardennes sky in a pale, freezing blue, the heavy fog slowly lifted. The trench line was brutally battered, covered in a thick layer of empty brass casings, torn branches, and black soot. Sitting at the bottom of the ruined foxhole, exhausted beyond normal human limits, with hands completely numb to the world, lay the harsh reality of survival. Beside the frozen, entirely useless corpse of the beautiful, expensive submachine gun lay the $15 piece of stamped metal tubing. The weapon was filthy beyond belief. Its wire stock was slightly bent. The crude factory welds were covered in thick carbon. It remained the ugliest thing on the entire battlefield. But the surviving men in that trench never looked at it the same way again. They truly understood the brutal, unforgiving math of winter warfare. Beauty does not win desperate firefights. Tight, expensive tolerances do not survive the freezing mud. When you are cold, cut off, and facing a highly determined enemy, you do not want a piece of mechanical art that demands constant respect and maintenance. You want a blunt tool that absolutely does not care how bad the conditions get. This ugly duckling of a weapon went on to serve long past the Second Global Conflict, fighting through the dense, humid jungles of Vietnam and even riding inside the extremely tight confines of armored vehicles all the way into the Gulf War. It survived the test of time specifically because it fully embraced its own ugliness. It was a plumber's absolute nightmare that managed to fix a deadly leak the high-ranking generals did not know how to plug. We constantly dig through these frozen historical archives to find the gritty truth hiding behind the rusted metal. History very often chooses to remember the elegant, the incredibly expensive, and the glamorous machines of war. But actual victory on the ground is almost always built by the cheap, the heavy, and the fiercely despised tools of the infantry. If you deeply respect the real stories of survival that are written in freezing mud and stamped steel, please hit that like button right now. It is the only real way we can push back against the modern algorithm and bring these forgotten workhorses into the light they deserve. Subscribe to the channel so you absolutely do not miss our next trench-level historical breakdown. And please, tell us down in the comments, what modern piece of notoriously ugly gear do you firmly believe will outlast the delicate, high-tech gadgets of today? Keep your powder completely dry, and we will see you on the next line.